Is he a genius or a brazen seller of dreams? Columbus approached kings with a map on which half the planet was missing, promised gold, spices, and a short route to Asia, and stubbornly lied that the Earth was smaller. He was considered annoying. He was rejected. But he kept knocking. The result: 4 voyages, no wealth, mutinies, chains on his hands upon return. A hero who opened an epoch, or an adventurer who launched a conveyor of blood and greed? Now let's figure out what part of the legend is true and what is smoke. Stay tuned. Let's start with the fact that in school, we were only told half the story. Remember those 3 ships, the Niña, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria, and that Columbus spent 7 years going around the courts of Europe, offering his crazy project before Spain took the bait? But what do we know about the man himself? Who was this stubborn Genoese, whom some consider a great discoverer and others a cruel colonizer? Christopher Columbus was born in Genoa around 1451 of our era in the family of a weaver. Yes, not in an aristocratic family, but in the family of an ordinary craftsman. Imagine, a weaver's son dreams of sea voyages and great discoveries. Sounds like the beginning of a Hollywood movie, doesn't it? But reality is always more complex. Columbus started as a merchant sailor, sailed the Mediterranean Sea, perhaps even participated in pirate raids. Not quite the image of a noble explorer that our textbooks paint for us. Did you know that Columbus was a real bookworm? He studied the works of ancient geographers, maps, calculations. He was especially impressed by the works of Paolo Toscanelli, who suggested that Asia could be reached by sailing west. But here's the catch. Columbus took Toscanelli's calculations and reduced them. He claimed that the distance from the Canary Islands to Japan was only 3,700 nautical miles, although in reality it exceeds 10,000. An accidental error or a deliberate lie to make his project look more attractive to investors? And here we come to the first interesting question. Was Columbus a brilliant visionary or just an excellent marketer? Imagine a pitch session of the 15th century. Columbus enters the throne room and begins his presentation. Your Majesties, invest in my startup. I will find a short route to India, bring you spices and gold, and you will become richer than all the monarchs of Europe. Sounds tempting, doesn't it? Especially if you keep quiet about the fact that your calculations are, to put it mildly, optimistic. But why did Columbus so stubbornly insist on his idea? For 7 years, he went from one European court to another. Portugal, England, France, all refused. And only Spain, recently united under the rule of Ferdinand and Isabella, decided to take a risk. Perhaps it wasn't just about gold and spices. Columbus was a deeply religious person and believed that his mission was to bring Christianity to new lands. In his diaries, he wrote that the riches he would find would help finance a new crusade to liberate Jerusalem. That's quite a mix of commercial and religious motives. Now let's talk about the journey itself. 3 small ships, 90 crew members, and complete uncertainty ahead. Imagine, you're sailing into nowhere. The compass behaves strangely. Magnetic declination was not well understood then. The sailors begin to grumble. After a month of sailing, the crew is already on the verge of mutiny, and then land, the 12th of October 1492 of our era, the island of Guanahani in the Bahamas archipelago. Columbus named it San Salvador Holy Savior. Symbolic, isn't it? But here's what's interesting. Until the end of his days, Columbus was convinced that he had reached Asia. Even when all the facts indicated otherwise, he stubbornly insisted on his own. Is this an impenetrable belief in his own rightness or an inability to admit a mistake? Or maybe he simply didn't want to lose face in front of his royal sponsors. After all, he promised them India, not some unknown islands. Let's now talk about what happened after the landing. And here begins the most controversial part of Columbus's story. On one hand, he described the local inhabitants, the Taino, as beautiful, peaceful, and hospitable people. On the other hand, he almost immediately began to view them as potential slaves and a source of profit. In his diary, he wrote, "They should make good servants. With 50 men, they can all be subjugated and made to do whatever you wish. And these weren't just words. Already during his second voyage, Columbus sent 500 Indians to Spain as slaves. Many of them died en route, and on Hispaniola, modern Haiti, and the Dominican Republic, he established a system where every Indian over 14 years old had to bring a certain amount of gold every 3 months. Those who didn't meet the quota were severely punished. Imagine, you live a peaceful life on your island, and suddenly, strange bearded men come and demand gold from you that you simply don't have. But was Columbus particularly cruel for his time? Or was he just acting within the framework of the then ideas about civilized treatment of savages? This is a complex question. On one hand, even by the standards of the 15th century, his management methods raised questions. So much so that in 1500 of our era, he was arrested and sent to Spain in chains. But on the other hand, the colonial system that he began to create was continued and developed by his followers. Interestingly, the Spanish monarchs themselves were ambiguous in their attitude towards the native inhabitants of the New World. Queen Isabella, learning that Columbus had brought Indians as slaves, was outraged and ordered them to be freed, declaring that they were subjects of the Spanish crown and could not be enslaved. But this did not prevent the development of the encomienda system, essentially disguised slavery, in which Indians were entrusted to Spanish colonists for Christianization and protection. And what about Columbus himself as an administrator? Here his track record is not brilliant either. He turned out to be a poor manager. The colonists rebelled, the Indians revolted, much less gold was found than expected. As a result, Columbus was removed from his position as governor and replaced by Francisco de Bobadilla, who sent him to Spain in chains. Although, to give credit to the Spanish monarchs, they immediately freed Columbus upon arrival and even allowed him to make 2 more voyages. But what about Columbus's legacy? Can he be considered a great discoverer if he didn't understand what he had discovered until the end of his life? And can we call a discovery something that was already known to millions of people who lived on these lands? After all, the Vikings also reached America 500 years before Columbus, but this did not lead to permanent contacts between the Old and New Worlds. Perhaps Columbus's greatness is not that he was the first, but that his voyages had consequences. They started a process that historians call the Columbian Exchange, a massive exchange of plants, animals, technologies, and, unfortunately, diseases between the 2 hemispheres. Potatoes, tomatoes, corn, chocolate came to Europe from America and changed the diet of millions of people, and horses, cows, wheat, and iron tools went in the opposite direction. But there was also a dark side to this exchange. European diseases, to which Native Americans had no immunity, led to a demographic catastrophe. By some estimates, up to 90% of America's indigenous population died from epidemics of smallpox, measles, and other diseases. Entire civilizations were wiped off the face of the earth, not so much by the swords of the conquistadors as by invisible enemies, viruses, and bacteria. And yet, is it fair to place all the responsibility for this on Columbus? He could not know about microbes and immunity. He did not plan genocide. He was a product of his time, a time when Europeans considered themselves entitled to civilize the rest of the world, without asking whether this world wanted to be civilized. Or perhaps, instead of judging Columbus by modern standards, we should view him as a complex, contradictory figure. A man who changed the course of history without understanding it himself. A man whose ambitions, faith, and stubbornness led to consequences that he could not foresee. In the last years of his life, Columbus was disappointed and hurt. He felt that he was not appreciated enough, that he was deprived of deserved honors and wealth. He died in 1506 of our era in Valladolid, Spain, in relative obscurity. The irony of fate, a man whose name every schoolchild knows today left life without understanding the scale of his achievements. Now let's return to our initial question. Was Columbus a hero or an adventurer? Perhaps he was both. A hero because he risked going into the unknown, overcame resistance and skepticism, showed incredible persistence. An adventurer because he manipulated facts to get funding and was not averse to cruel methods to achieve his goals. But perhaps what's most important is not how we evaluate Columbus, but what lessons we draw from his story. A lesson that great discoveries often happen accidentally when we're looking for something completely different. A lesson that even good intentions can lead to catastrophic consequences. A lesson that history is not divided into black and white, into heroes and villains, but consists of many shades of gray. Today, we live in a world that has been largely shaped by the consequences of Columbus's voyages. Globalization, international trade, cultural exchange. All this began with those 3 small ships that set off into the unknown in 1492 of our era. And at the same time, the problems of colonialism, racism, exploitation also have their roots in that era. So, is Columbus a hero or an adventurer? Perhaps the answer depends not so much on the facts of his biography as on our own worldview, our values and priorities. And maybe instead of passing a final verdict, we should recognize the complexity and ambiguity of this historical figure. What do you think? Do you consider Columbus a hero who changed the world for the better? Or an adventurer who did more harm than good? Or perhaps you have your own, more nuanced assessment? Write in the comments. I'm really interested in knowing your opinion. And if you enjoyed this journey into the past, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you don't miss new episodes. Next time we'll travel to an era when maps were full of blank spots and travelers risked their lives not for gold, but for knowledge. It will be no less exciting adventure, I promise. Until new meetings at the crossroads of history.